the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome to the show. We've got myself, Stephen Sakach. We've got Maher and Tullio Siragusa with us today. So it's often said that the kindest person in the room is the smartest. And what we want to do with this podcast is help you with finding all the obstacles and roadblocks and barriers against connection and empathy in business and within yourself, and how we can overcome these. So with that, Tullio, who do you think this podcast would be for?
I think this podcast is really designed for anyone who is committed to being a people-centric organization. So if you're a business that cares about people, whether those people are your customers, your employees, your colleagues, your partners, this is a podcast designed to talk about how can we spread more empathy in the workplace, spread more empathy in the world, how we can even spread more love in the workplace. What business impact does that have? There's actual some real great data that suggests it's not only just good for people, it's good for business. And of course, anyone who's committed to growing and becoming a better leader, a better human being, that's really what this is about. And we want to hear from people that have their stories to share, just like we're going to share ours today. And I'm really excited about where this will take us.
Ash, I see you got the puppy there. How about yourself? Who do you see this podcast being for?
I think, I see this podcast being for any organization that's trying to build a sustainable system into the future. I think when you're trying to bypass certain obstacles that are, self-sabotaged within an internal organization, whether that's resentment in the workplace, way colleagues communicate with each other, the way typically issues could start to stem through resentment and problems start to stem in business that typically aren't really caught. They are problems that are planted like seeds. So if you're someone that's looking to build something sustainable, something that's going to bypass that 10-year mark in your business, and you understand that it all starts with your people, then I believe that this podcast could definitely help you in building a more sustainable system through love and connection internally.
Yeah, I really think it is for anyone. I mean, if you're working at a company, there's usually some way that you're going to be able to connect with other people, right? No matter what position you're in, whether it's customers, whether it's your colleagues, and build authentic connections, be empathetic when it's required. So I think it's important for anyone. It's probably especially important, I think, for marketers too, because they're the keepers and the tellers of your brand story, right? So if you can build humanity into your business and you can tell that story, and you can authentically connect with your customers, they'll love you so much they won't leave you. But having that authentic connection, I think it's something that can't be faked. So it really does require all parts of the business, to be on the same page, to rowing in the same direction. So Tullio and Ash, when you've worked at other companies, have you been in a situation where they've lacked that empathy? Tullio, what about you? What comes to mind?
Absolutely. I actually was part of an organization where some of these principles were part of the fabric of the company. And it was such a contrast that I didn't know just how bad it was, the alternative was. And in fact, one of the reasons I became a design thinking practitioner was because I was like, there's got to be a way to codify and help companies implement these ideas. So, in an environment where it lacks empathy or a focus on people, or what I like to call the command and control environment, you're just a cog in the wheel. And sometimes, you don't have a say on which way the wheel is going, how fast it's moving. All you can do is hang on. And sometimes you fall off and no one's there to pick you up. And so it feels very lonely, very stressful, very frustrating. And it's not like that just for all the employees, even the executives experienced that. I remember as an executive in command and control companies, you just feel like you're constantly having to be switched on. And you end up having this duplicitous sort of way of being where, at the office, you wear one mask, which is the business guy, and at home, you get to be loving and kind to your family. And those two are separated. And so it's exhausting, to say the least. But you don't know it's exhausting until you experience something else. So I felt as though after experiencing a loving, kind, empathetic kind of organization, anything else just feels dirty to me. It's like, how can anybody operate that way? But it's like 99% of most companies, maybe not 99%, but it's way up there, still operate this way. And it makes people feel really disconnected, disengaged, and not excited to go to work. It just becomes something you need to do instead of something you're excited to do. That was my experience.
I agree. Especially the word exhaustion too. It's just tiring, right? From many ways. Ash, how about yourself?
I have to piggyback on the word duplicitous. That is, that's the perfect way to put it. You come into an environment where you can't stand being in that environment, and then you leave that environment where you can stand being in that environment, which could be going back home to your family, right? Can you imagine? It's exhausting to have to wake up and not stand the environment that you're in, maybe have an issue with your colleagues, maybe there's a level of resentment or toxicity in the environment, or maybe you believe that you have to become this tough boss and you have to be a certain type of way with certain people. What I found from that experience is it's really hard to play two characters in life and in business and in everything, right? Because even when you're trying to build that genuine connection where you need that cushion from your employees to step up or practice that good faith or goodwill or go above a little bit above and beyond, it's hard for them to go above and beyond with someone that they don't feel authentically connected to, where, oh, you're this way with me in this instance, but outside you're in this way. Well, you know what? If it's just business, then I'm going to choose myself over the greater good of the company. And what I found with organizations that practice that love within the organization, where everybody practices goodwill together, I think naturally that law of reciprocity, we typically do naturally want to help each other out. And we want to help good people out. I think it's all in our nature to want to be able to connect and help and create value. And when there's environments that encourage that, I think you get your best work, but also you actually enjoy showing up to work. And I think that's a big, big part of it. The enjoyment of work allows you to enter the flow states. Those flow states allow you to put out your best. So I think that's how it all kind of plays together. And trying to be two different people in an organization just leads to bad blood, and typically bad business, bad connections with customers and everything and such. So that's just from my experience, what I've seen.
So Tullio, when you're in one of those situations, what are kind of some of the things that come to mind for you as far as how you can get over it or how you can make a difference in a company like that?
Well, it really comes down to, this is something I spend a lot of time with, me and some other crazies. We decided there's got to be a better way to run companies, and we have to educate companies on how they can do that better. And so we started this movement almost 6 years ago called radicalpurpose.org. And there are four things that often lack inside of an organization that has highly disengaged employees. And these happen to be the four things we all crave. One is a desire to belong to something greater than ourselves. We all have that. And it's why, movements, religion, politics, whatever is such a big following. People need to belong to something greater than themselves. Two is the desire to have meaning behind what we're doing. If it has no meaning, it doesn't sustain our energy. It doesn't sustain our excitement long enough. Three is really the ability to make an impact. We all desire to make an impact one way or the other. And finally, the desire to be becoming. So to become greater than what you are, right? So if you're in a company that all they care about is production, it's hard to figure out, do I belong to something greater? No, I'm just focused on my thing. It's part of a greater picture. Okay, does it have meaning? Not really. I'm just judged on this. I'm not part of a team effort. and my impact is limited to what I got hired to do, which is limiting me as a human being. I'm multidimensional. I can do so much more. And also I don't get to be becoming because I'm just playing in my lane. Right. So it's a very, it's not an exciting way to be. And you don't know this is happening for years until you experience otherwise. So if you are an employee of a company that operates this way, there's things you can do. You can create your own tribe, get a community of like-minded other employees and find meaning behind what you're doing. Maybe you guys can agree to volunteer somewhere, grow together. You don't have to wait for the bosses, quote unquote, to decide for you to create meaning, to create greater purpose, to be able to make an impact and to be becoming. You can organize this amongst yourselves. And one of the things that I've advised, even organizations that are very command and control structured, is find a division or a department where they can operate that way, or a group of people that want to operate that way. And you can do that very effectively. I know GE, for example, while a traditional corporate environment, they had one of their division that was operating as a World Blue. World Blue is one of the certification of these systems like Sociocracy, Teal, or Morningstar. These are all self-management systems, right? And they had a division that adopted it. So it's not like the entire company has to do it. And sometimes it's just a group of people that decide, we're going to give meaning to what we're doing. We're going to get together and do something meaningful. So you don't have to be completely feeling like a victim in an environment where you're not controlling the speed of the wheel or where the wheel is going. You are a cog, but you can get the few cogs of you together and maybe create something that's more meaningful and gives a sense of feeling better about going to work every day. It's a lot of work to do it that way, but what's the alternative? Just feeling like a cog.
Yeah, and I think you can start like small too, just connecting with other people. That's just such a simple thing, right? Where you don't, even beyond the company's goals and all that stuff, just connecting with your colleagues, connecting more authentically with your customers. It doesn't matter what you're doing in those situations. That's just like, it's such a little thing. For our company, we struggled, for a while. It's like, how can we build all this into what we're doing? So we came up with this sort of concept, which was build love into scalable systems. So it's this Bliss concept that we use. And what that allows us is to sort of have this North Star. We didn't know exactly where we were going, on this journey, right? We were like, how are we going to get there to be this company that we want to be? But it allowed us to layer little bit by little bit different elements into our company that made us a more loving company. And so anytime there's any sort of issue or something, it's something we just always fall back on, right? We're just going to always have that there. Okay, well, what's the loving thing to do here? If you don't know the answer, that's always a great place to start.
That's fantastic. So tell us a little bit about where did this come from? This desire to bliss, build love into scalable system. It had to have origin somewhere. What planted that seed with you?
Yeah. So when I was young, I was studying consciousness a lot, trying to figure things out in the world. And so consciousness, it follows this path, right? As you're able to take on more perspectives and become more empathetic, your compassion grows and your consciousness grows. And we all do this. All cultures do this. It's just this same sort of path. And so, I kind of realized that doing the loving thing will always be that higher ground, right? And so I was talking to my grandfather one day, and he said to me, he goes, no matter what you do in life, always do it with love. And I was like, hey, yeah, I could study consciousness a lot, but I can take this, this man who's got 80 years of life experience and who I know is just the most happy, contented person in his life right now. And he's gone through ups and downs and stuff. He wasn't always that way, but, he was just at this stage in his life, he quit what he used to be doing. Now he's doing what he wants to do, and he's doing it with purpose and with love. And you could see that just, radiating from him. And so I was like, yeah, I just knew, right? I could study all the consciousness I want, but I just knew, seeing it from him and him saying that. So that was sort of the idea. And it, for us as a company, where it really came to manifest itself is we started to grow. And when you're growing, this is really where culture can get stretched. And for me, as a leader, it's like, oh, well, I've got to let go of the reins of a lot of stuff. How's it going to go? I don't want it to careen off course or anything. It was like, how can we keep some sort of North Star to the culture as we grow? So that was the first part of it. And the other part is that we're really, as you grow, the next step in your growth beyond that scaling is systemizing, right? And so if you've got a bad culture, you don't want to systemize a bad culture. It's just, it's just going to create bigger and bigger problems for you. So build love into scalable systems. This really hits kind of on those two elements of scale and systemizing. And it allowed us to keep that North Star as we were growing and figure it out along the way, which is, I think, really important, is figuring out along the way, because you want it to be organic. Stuff's not going to stick always, right? You're going to try things and it's not going to work. You're going to try other things, and those, will stick and it'll be more authentic. So that's kind of the genesis of that. And, like I said, there's 1,000 parts to that afterward that we've just built into this, in our culture. And I do think it resonates.
I was wondering if you've had any challenges around this, introducing people to it in the context of work. And we're talking about Bliss, and we'll talk about building love into scalable system. We should also talk about what is the business impact, what is the business benefit of this, because it's not just about the people. There's definitely some data that suggests this is actually good for business. But before we go into that, I was curious to hear any stories of anyone you might have met with challenges, embracing this. I can share one real quick. I had a story where we had an employee that we hired in one of the companies I was with that was operating this way, and they suffer from tremendous anxiety, mostly because they weren't told what to do every day. Like, tell me what to do. What am I supposed to do? Give me what I'm being measured against. And it was like, no, this is self-organizing, self-managed, just work as a team. You come up with what you want to do, right? We have goals and you're being asked to contribute what you want to contribute to these goals. And it was such a foreign concept to him that it was causing him stress. I mean, we even paid for some therapy to try to see what was going on. It was a serious problem. And eventually we realized maybe this environment is not for you. It felt a little bit like the elephant that was a baby elephant tied to a pole, and it tried to break free when it was a baby and it couldn't. And for years and years, it tried to break free. And then when it became this majestic giant elephant that could break away from the pole like this, it didn't even try anymore because it just was programmed to think, I can't. And it felt really sad to me to watch this, because this was an individual who just couldn't embrace this kind of freedom. And it made me realize there's people out there that have been so scarred by the non-authentic command and control type of environments that they are afraid to even be free. Any experiences like that? I'd love to hear anything that you guys might have experienced yourself on this.
So I have to add to something that's similar to your experience. The difference being with how people dealt with mistakes in the workplace, where you're encouraged to be proactive, you're encouraged to go the extra mile. But if you make a mistake in the process, you will be beaten down and highly, what's the word I'm looking for when you're in trouble? You get in trouble, right? Yeah. And that causes people to not take any action. They'd rather not be the proactive one. They'd rather not go out there and take that extra call and see if they could convince a customer to come in. They'd rather just play it safe. And in that playing safe, nothing's getting done. Why aren't you guys taking the actions you're supposed to be doing? Why aren't you doing your jobs? Well, I'm scared to do my job because I know if I do my job wrong, I might lose my job or I'm going to get torn into. So I'd rather just play it safe. Well, everyone's playing it safe and nothing's getting done. Nothing's being pushed forward. So now they're running into an additional frustration. How do I get our people to be proactive? Well, maybe be a little bit nicer to them if they make a mistake. Maybe show some more love, things like that.
Yeah, I always say any problem that happens at work, it's really my problem in some way. So that takes that off your your shoulders to some extent, because maybe I didn't provide you the right training, or I didn't, set the stage correctly for you. There's things that I can control or, push that's going to help you succeed. And so, yeah, there's going to be failures, and yeah, you messed up at that thing, but it's like, okay, how did you mess up? Why did you mess up? What could we do better? And especially from leadership, what can we do better on our end so that, the guide rails are there. And it's particularly important with like that bliss concept too, of if we're going to be this empathetic ad agency, we've got to live that. We've got to be authentic with it. You can't just, have someone just suddenly go off the rails. I've never seen that happen at our work either, where someone just loses it. Because I think there's that, it's just that North Star hanging over them, right? They're just like, okay, take a deep breath. All right, let's see. How can I kind of connect with this person? So yeah, I think, it's a different mindset, and maybe it's difficult for people. But I do truly think that this is really what people want. A lot of times they do want that connection. It just makes your day so much better. It makes your life so much better. And different cultures have different things where they're pursuing this. We're all sort of pursuing this, right?
Yeah. This individual happened to be coming from a culture where it's the bosses historically will play nice, but it's like, I got you kind of thing, which is it's dumb. It's counterproductive, counterintuitive, and it doesn't help the business. And speaking of the business, this is the Bliss Business Podcast. Otherwise, it would just be the Bliss Podcast. We can talk about bliss all day long, but let's talk about the business ramification of this. There is some data suggesting that this is actually really smart way to run a business. You want to share some of that with us, Stephen?
Yeah. So I think first off, this is going to be the future of business, right? We know how people evolve. We know how their consciousness evolved, and it's that, like I mentioned, the ability to take on more perspectives, the ability to be more empathetic. This is across cultures. When you look at higher consciousness and how people evolve, it really becomes that sort of empathetic, loving, humble thing, right? So we know how people are going to evolve. And businesses, the gravity of business usually follows how people are evolving, right? So right now, people are evolving to those higher stages of consciousness much faster than they used to. So the workforce is coming in with higher stage of consciousness than they did 100 years ago, right? So when you're building a business, you've got to kind of keep in mind the future. And if you're not going to be addressing some of those things, it's going to cost you in that way too with your personnel. But data-wise, yeah, there's definitely some studies that have looked at these companies that take this sort of empathetic approach to what they do, and it covers all assets of their, all aspects of their business. Not just customers, not just their colleagues, but also the investors, and there's different areas in the business. They're looking for this sort of holistic approach to running an empathetic business. And so, what the study did is it went and identified about 20, 30 companies, narrowed it down to about 20 or 30 of them. And it compared the results of if you bought stock in this company versus if you bought stock in the S&P 500. S&P 500, straight standard investment, right? So in 5 years, the return on these sort of empathetic, loving companies was 151%. The return on the S&P 500 companies was 61%. In 10 years, these blissful companies were at 410% return. S&P 500 was 107%. In 15 years, it was 1,681% versus S&P 500 at 118%. So the data is there. It backs up this approach. And so it wouldn't get anywhere if there wasn't ROI in this.
I have to piggyback off of
that's
that.
Like 10x. That's true 10x. People talk about 10x in your business. This is the way to do it. Go ahead, Ash.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, I think one of the things I was going to mention before we transition to this question regarding, what are some of the holdups that happen in an organization is that most people are really revenue focused. So you have an organization where they're very sales and numbers focused, hard numbers, hard revenue. How does this benefit us in the short term? And they're really short term thinking, right? How does this make us money? And it was interesting. There's a company called Lorien Home Health. It's a company my mother happens to work for, and she happens to be one of the top producers in that company. But more in the recent months, she had reached out to me and she had mentioned, it's been a lot tougher. We recently lost our relationships with the hospitals, and the way my mother, I'll get into how she gained those relationships, which actually ties everything together. But one of her biggest frustrations was that we really need to hit our numbers, and it almost now comes off as a little bit desperate because we're going in there pushing really hard, and it seems to have created more of a toxic environment. People are afraid that they're going to be losing their jobs. People are cutthroat, so we're not really accomplishing our revenue goals because everyone's trying to take money from each other or try to work against each other. So my question to my mother was, well, tell me this: when you were doing your best and you were getting those best numbers and you had made those relationships with the hospitals, what about your job did you enjoy the most, and why do you even do the job that you do? And she said, Ash, really, I really enjoyed helping people. So early on, that's all I really wanted to do was help people. So my mom, she had a light bulb moment that the reason why she gained the relationships with the hospitals at the time was because she was out there helping individuals and doing more than her job actually described, which was she was showing love in the workplace. She was showing love internally. She was showing love externally. She built the right relationships. Next thing you know, she's getting all of the hospital referrals. So all of this started to happen. So I said, hey, Mom, why don't you try this? Instead of worrying about your numbers at the end of the month, why don't you practice this experiment? And mind you, she's now in the middle of this experiment. So I would love to hear the result and maybe to get her on the podcast as a result of this. But I said, why don't you ask yourself, how many people did you help today? Even if it's opening a door for someone, it's getting on a phone call, talking to a family, helping them through their tough experience that they're having with their loved ones, trying to get them home health. Make those metrics important to you. And then at the very end, ask yourself, how many referrals did you end up getting at the end of the month? So go after a love goal and see how that results in a financial goal at the very end. It was like a light bulb moment for her. She was like, oh my gosh. Yeah. And it was almost the pressure came off her chest because she actually was like, oh, wait, this makes sense to me because this is what I was actually doing when I had nothing. I just chose love because that's all I had to work with. And it fades away when you get caught up in the numbers. So she had to be reminded of that. And I think that was a speech she took into her workplace that week. And I haven't talked to her yet, but I could tell you that just having spoken to her recently, just in general, she seems a lot happier. And I'm really excited to hear the result of that. So yeah, I think there's a benefit and even in a financial side of things when we really do practice love outside and inside.
It's a great story, Ash. I think to myself too, when I'm designing something or building something, I've lately now started working in two currencies. It's the financial currency, but then I also go over it, the currency of love and how I can work within that environment too. And I think right now, most companies, they're just thinking, strictly on one aspect. It's like, hey, shareholders, here's how we're doing, right? And their KPIs are all related. That they don't have KPIs in those other areas that at least most companies, the ones that are really successful that we talked about, that have that huge return on investment, the 1,681%, those ones have looked in all parts of their business on how we can just make this more authentic, caring, compassionate business. So I know we've talked a lot today. We're going to jump into some next episodes here that are going to cover different aspects of these parts of your business. The first one we're going to tackle is resentment in the workplace, which is a tough one. And, from a leadership standpoint, there's a lot of things that you can do or mess up that'll cause resentment in the workplace. And you got a lot of things going on in your mind, I know, and you're pulled in a lot of directions. And, if you have broken promises or things like that, you're going to get yourself into trouble. The other topic we're going to get into is small talk. I get it. It's got its purpose, right? We all need it, but it's like the doormat to a deeper conversation. It's not where you want to be. When I'm talking on a Zoom call and I've got a couple minutes while everyone's joining in, I don't want to use those couple minutes to be an expert on the 5-day weather forecast that's coming up across the country, and totally know every little detail on that. That's not going to get anywhere. So we want to help you connect on a deeper level and, move past that small talk. So these are the topics that we're coming up with next. And then if you tune in, we'd love you to join the conversation.
Yes. In fact, if you want to be a guest on the show, just go to the blisspodcast.com and click on contact us. We'd love to speak with those who have implemented some of these principles in their workplace, those who are undergoing some of this transformation. We want to hear from you. We want to learn from you. We want to share your stories, and hopefully we can all rise together from the experience. Thanks for joining us today on the Bliss Business Podcast, and we'll see you again next week, same time, same channel.